Our next speaker will continue where this film ended by expanding on the relevance of channeled information to UFO research. He has been active in Queensland UFO organizations since the late 60s. He is currently the administrator for Australia's only, and to my understanding, true national UFO organization, ACUFOS. His vision is to somehow make this ACUFOS a part of all existing UFO groups in this country now, in order to maintain, protect, and make available all the UFO research and records gathered to everyone concerned. A kind of free national UFO database, if you will. This vision is yet to be realized. How can he not have our support? Please welcome Martin Gottschall.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think what I'm going to speak about today is really more in the field of the philosophy of UFO research. That is to say, when we step back and look at all the things we've been trying to do and ask ourselves, are we going about this in the best possible way? And we step back and say, while we've been busy accusing of the rest of the world of denying the facts and ignoring the facts and not seeing the inferences and implications, do we not sometimes do the same thing ourselves? For after all, we're part of the same community and we share the same shortcomings as the people whose shortcomings we see so very clearly. And so it is that in conferences and gatherings like this one, channeled material and the accounts of contactees tend not to get too much attention. I think part of the stated reason for this is it's too way out for the other side of the society that we want to attract, the scientists and the general run of the public that we want to get our messages out to. We don't dare to be that way out. But I think there's also an unspoken agenda too. It hurts to stretch the mind that far. It opens chasms and fears and uncertainties, and we are human beings as well as researchers, and we're subject to our failings as well. So I hope that in addressing this topic of channeled material, I can, both myself and all of us, help all of us to see a little more clearly why we've taken our particular stance in UFO research and how perhaps we might improve on it. I'm not here to tell you that channeled material is true or real or accurate. That is not, I think, for a UFO researcher to determine. We have our own questions to answer, as I'll point out. So what is channeled material, or what is channeling? It's one aspect of a broader category of information, sometimes called received information, in which an individual somehow switches off their consciousness to such a degree that another consciousness allegedly is able to communicate through the communication equipment of that person, be it automatic writing or the voice faculties of that individual. That's the theory of channeling. And I'm not here to tell you that this is true or not true. It's not really quite relevant to my concern here. But I think that's a fair definition of what channeling is understood to be. A classical case is of a person who is confronted by a group of people like this one and sits down in a chair and makes a few jerky movements and a few other sounds and then appears to be in a different state of consciousness. When questions are put, the answers coming claim to be from a different consciousness than that of the person sitting there. And often, I think many people accept that as being the fact that those answers are really coming from a different intelligence than the one associated with the individual whom they see. That's channeled material. I looked at channeled material quite carefully about 20 or 25 years ago. as I think all of us do at one point or another, we look at everything to see what might be learned from it. And my finding about it were roughly that there is an enormous amount of material of this kind around. You can get it by the bookload. I have that much in shelving of it, and I didn't even try to collect it all. I just looked at some. And some of it, to me, was very profound. A small portion of the channeled material is what I would call of a high quality. The ideas are profound. The motivation of the source seems to be of a high moral order, etc. The attention to detail, the attention to truth seems to be genuine, so on. I would call that of a high quality. The bulk of channeled material, in my finding, tended to be recycled, that is to say, a repetition of something which you could find in print somewhere else from an earlier time. When channeled information makes predictions, those predictions are just as bad as predictions made by almost everyone else. They usually fail at the critical time. And we've had examples of this just in the last couple of years. So the ability to make predictions that are fulfilled by subsequent historical experience doesn't establish channeling as accurate or reliable to a large degree, no more so than most other forms of prediction. But typically, a channeled body of material has a well-defined worldview. It paints a clear picture. Forget for the moment if that picture is true or false, real or not. It's clear. I don't think if I were the channeler here speaking to you, I'd hold your attention for very long if I couldn't project a well-defined story of some kind, give you a clear worldview of some kind. And I want to draw on this latter feature most especially when I look at how channeled material might be applied in UFO research. Before doing so, I'd like to briefly give what I think is a good definition of what UFO research is. I think it's fair to say that most UFO researchers take the view that the UFO phenomenon is at least to some extent physically real, has a physical reality to it. Too many people have bumped into them and kicked them and been bumped by these things, either the UFOs or its occupants, for that not to be a reasonable premise. That does not mean, of course, that they are only real in the sense that we understand physical reality. We are simply saying that whatever else they may be, they also can behave like physically real objects, and therefore the methods of research that have worked well for us in studying other physically real things like nature and the physical world have a relevance to UFO research. And I think in any research practice, it is very important to distinguish facts from inferences. We need both to understand a phenomenon. What we tend to do, and the thing that we always have to guard against doing, is to judge what can be fact by whether or not it agrees with what we think the world is like, our inferences. I think the early history of UFO research came up very hard against this particular problem. When UFOs displayed the physical characteristics they did, the apparent weightlessness, the tremendous changes in speed and direction at very high inferred accelerations, the first reaction of the most qualified people was, this is physically impossible, therefore that can't be a true factual statement. It doesn't fit my theories, so it can't be a fact. We're still probably up against... We're probably still up against that to a large degree, although perhaps less so than before. So as UFO researchers, we have to guard carefully against judging facts by our theories or our beliefs about what is real or true. We have to have a methodology for letting facts speak for themselves, for deciding what is a fact on the merits of the factual side of it, while our theoretical thinking is switched off for the time being. And then when we've done that, then we try to assimilate the facts into some kind of a conceptual framework by a process which no longer is worried about whether facts are facts or not, but accepts them for the moment as facts and says, well, what sense can I make of them? So we do this, just like we have 2 feet and we stand on one while we take a step with the other, then we'll put that one down and stand on it while we take a step with the next one. Rather so do we do the fact gathering and the interpreting stepwise. And when we're doing one, we're not doing the other. And if we try to do the 2 together, we'll trip and fall. It's a bit like that with UFO research as well. So that's the kind of thing I think we all do in one way or another. And that, in fact, is essentially what is called the scientific method, or shall we put it the other way around? As science became established and grew, scientists adopted this method, which existed before science ever had a name, as a good way of studying the natural world. And I don't think there's any arguments about that. It is a proven method. It works quite well if we do it the right way. Okay, well, that's UFO research as I understand it. And now I can address the question of what can we do, or what can we use channeled material for in furthering our attempts to understand the UFO phenomenon. And in this respect, I think it's fair to say that channeled material does not contribute very much of a factual kind. There isn't much of a factual kind in the channeled body of information. Some that there is may be difficult to establish factually. If there is, we apply the normal rules of factual analysis to it, let the facts stand on their own. If they come out of that test okay, we'll take it as fact. We don't have that much of it. What we have in the channeled body of material is a lot of ideas and concepts and belief systems. And just because they're that kind of stuff is no reason to ignore them, because we need ideas and concepts and belief systems in order to make sense of the body of facts that we have associated with the UFO phenomenon by a careful process of assessment, categorizing, truth finding, and so on. But they're just a great big pile of facts until we make sense of them, and we need a conceptual framework with ideas, notions, theories, and so on, with which to order them into something that might be an explanation of the things we don't know. We're trying to go from the things we know as facts to the things we don't know by this process of inference. And then if we think we've made some sort of progress, we say we have developed some kind of understanding of this phenomenon. Okay, so it is in the field of ideas and concepts that channeled material can be the most helpful. And I would like to illustrate this by making reference to a particular sample of channeled material. You've been looking here at this picture. It was published in something called The Voice of Universarius, which I received. I became a subscriber to that publication. It was produced in the United States between the early 1970s and through most of the 70s. And I also obtained some back copies of their publication because I was keen to complete my collection of what they were printing. This picture refers to Clarion. Clarion is a planet described by a contactee called Bertram Russell. His experience, to my knowledge, happened in the 50s, early or middle 50s. He was working with the road gang, building roads in the western desert of the United States. I forget the exact place right now. During the hot days, a lot of the work, especially maintenance work, was done at night. So he would work maintaining the vehicles and machinery, and when he had what was a lunch break at midnight or thereabouts, he'd drive off into the desert to have his lunch, in inverted commas. And on these occasions, he saw a large object land, he saw little beings come out of it. He had a repeated series of such sightings and encounters with the occupants, and became quite friendly with the lady captain that drove this thing. They were smallish type beings, who said she came from a planet called Clarion, which was beyond the moon. That's the only description she gave of it, and was a place we couldn't see with our telescopes. I believe that's what the word clarion here refers to. And those of you who have read Alec Newell's recent book called Co-Evolution may recognize a faint similarity between the diagrams in his book and the artwork in this picture. Has anyone read that book of Newell's? Anyone here? One? Oh, there's a few. Do you notice a similarity with the structures he shows on this world that he says he went to and some of the images here? I certainly picked it up. And I thought you might be interested to see it. Now, this thing was published in 1978. The channeled message that I'm going to use as reference, if I may have the next slide, please, was first produced, or the claimed dating of it is 1967. I'll give you the date here. The communication was given in March 1967 to a person called Marian Hartill. And the claimed source of this communication was Myron of the Ashtar Command. Now, you've all heard of the Ashtar Command. Did you know that it was popular in the 1960s? If you didn't, then you haven't realized how much recycled material you're getting in channeled sources. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily false. If the Ashtar Command is real, it's probably been around for a long time. I'm not concerned here to evaluate the truth or not of channeled material, but just to look at it. Okay, the Ashtar Command's been around for a long time. Now, look at that. The title of this particular message is Guidelines of Space Contact. The guidelines of space contact are these. I've also included on that page the source from which I got it. Notice it's the Voice of Universarius. The person editing and publishing it was an elderly gentleman called Zelram Carlsley, whom I met in 1980 in Portland, Oregon. This particular issue was number 17 of October, volume 17 of October 1978. And notice that they've been going for 17 years at that point. Number 10, of course, is for the 10th month. These are monthly issues. I don't have time to go through all of them in detail. I wish to make specific reference to paragraph number 6, which is on the next slide, please. Let's just look at that one. Paragraph number 6. The earth is a battleground. The forces of evil employ ships of great size and beauty, just as do the Christ forces. Now, you may recall that in the 50s and 60s, the Space Brothers were all benevolent, wonderful, beautiful beings. In the 1990s, there are no Space Brothers of benevolent, wonderful inclination. They're all baddies. You know, we've sort of swung from one extreme to the other. But in 1967, somebody was saying there are both kinds. And you can't tell the difference by seeing how lovely the spaceships are. Number 2, unprepared Earthlings who seek contact must not do so without knowledge of how to set up a positive force field and hold it around themselves. In other words, don't just rush into a contact, protect yourself first. Is that bad advice in today's context? Next item. The negative forces can and do abduct thousands of people each year off the surface of the earth, as well as animals, water and vegetation. Now, we knew a fair bit about that then. We know a lot more about it today. These samples are used for a hideous purpose. The source here didn't think that abductions, or what we today call the various genetically related procedures that seem to be associated with abductions, are necessarily for a very nice purpose. And a lot of people today don't think so either, and I count myself as one of them. I have serious moral qualms about the whole thing. I don't think nice people do the sort of things that we learn about. Now, this was available in 1967. I don't think it's much out of date today. It's extremely up to date, I think. And it illustrates that we can profit by taking notice of some of the better quality channeled material. I'm not saying we should believe it or necessarily accepted as true. Just be aware of the ideas, because then when the facts come your way that those ideas might help you to make sense of, you'll take a lot less time to make the connection. That's the kind of thing I'm saying. That's the kind of use that I would suggest we make of channeled material. So we're not trying to decide if they're genuine or not, if the alleged source is real or not, if they have an ulterior motive or if they're honest or not. These are important questions. If channeling is the very center of your involvement and interest, these are issues that you'd have to deal with. If you're concerned with unraveling the UFO phenomenon and having a look at channeled information because it seems to be talking about the UFO phenomenon too, or for any reason at all, you're really using it as a source of ideas and concepts. Maybe somebody has thought of something you didn't think of. Or maybe somebody is trying to get a message through all the noise and is using this particular avenue for doing it. Maybe I and each of us have a particular mental block, and one particular avenue of communication can get past it. I think that's probably where I can conveniently stop. The conclusions that we can draw from this are, as I've suggested, that we could profitably look at least a better quality channeled material, and that we can always remind ourselves that doing UFO research is like walking down the street. We gather facts and we make sense of them. We gather more facts, we make more sense of them. And while some of us might specialize in one field and others specialize in the other field, we have to do both in order to gain our understanding, the understanding that I believe. Thank you very much.